Good afternoon. My job is to keep you awake after lunch. Good luck, that's right. I heard that. So I'm going to talk about the electricity sector. And my act is really a warm-up act for some wonderful videos put together by some Stanford students and just a delightful panel that you're going to enjoy after the videos. But I'm going to set this up as to what's going on in the electricity sector. And you heard a little bit discussed before lunch. And so let me sort of start by saying that if you look at the human history, electricity has been a very recent phenomenon. Only about 150 years ago, during the Civil War in the United States, we were using lamps made of, fuel was whale oil. That was being used. Then became kerosene. And even now in certain parts of the United States, the electricity is lacking. And we take it for granted, but this only happened in the last 120 years or so. And what we enjoy today, and I'm sure you'll appreciate the next set of pictures, just to give you an idea of where we came from and where we are now. Things like we take this for granted, lighting in our house, all the food cooking, microwaves, the luxuries of heating and cooling, washing and drying. I hope there's a robot to do my cooking at some point. And the interconnection with our smartphones. And if you ever want to watch Christian McCaffrey run the ball outside of Stanford campus or Rose Bowl, he should have gotten the Heisman Trophy. You need a television. You need a television, and that requires electricity. Your financial requires electricity, and more, as we're going to see, the transportation will be electrified as well. If you look at this, this is amazing. We take this for granted. This was not what life was like about 100 years ago or so. And we take it so much for granted that we forgot that this has been one of the most successful industries in the history, because they've done such a good job that we forget about it. And we only notice it when it's not there. So I remember a dinner conversation with my girls. I have two daughters. This was when they were about 10 years old, 7 or 10 years old. And dinner conversation, we asked the question, where does electricity come from? And they kind of shrugged this as, what a silly question. It comes from the wall. And I said, okay, well, what's behind the wall? And they shrugged again, said, it's a backyard. And that goes to say, suggest the success of this industry. They worked very hard to give us reliable electricity all the time. But this world is about to change. And I'm going to give you a glimpse of what's going on behind this wall, so to speak. So if you look at the electricity system, it was started in the times of Tesla and Edison, and the architecture and the paradigm really has not changed till now. The architecture of the grid has been the same, and is based on large centralized power generation because they were cheaper, long-distance high-voltage transmission, and you need the high voltage to reduce the losses. Then you get to a local substation, and then you have local distribution feeder lines, and then it goes to your homes, your factories, and and buildings, commercial buildings, etc. And then we have put on top of that physical layer some market structures, pricing, utilities as business, etc. This has been the paradigm. And a few things to note about this, and this is going on for the last 100 years. Number one is this is one-way power flow. It starts from the left, goes to the right, from the generation to the loads. The generation is continuous, and it's slow. It's slowly moving, generation. And you can turn it up and turn it down slowly. The generation always tracks the load. That means you can turn on your light, your motors, your dishwasher, and somehow some generator figures out that there's something turned on and they ramp up. How do they do that? This is in the times of Tesla and Edison. The mechanism to do that was by frequency. Because if you turn something on, you go from 60 hertz, it becomes a little sluggish, 59.99. And then someone figures out on the generation side that it's going slow, so they ramp it up and bring it back to 60. That was the method of communication. So this has been the paradigm, and it's been extremely successful. And of course, on top of that, we have created organizational structures where there's a grid system operator, and you're going to hear from one of them later on in the panel. And that comes under federal regulation in the United States. And then we have the retail side, which comes under state, and they have different pricing structures. One is a market, one is a regulated utility, and you're going to hear from a CEO of a utility as well. And so we have put these little different clothes on top of this whole system. And because of this, we have created this network of a high voltage transmission line. These are the arteries and veins of the United States. And the same is true in Canada and Mexico, et cetera. And as we heard a little bit earlier, we need another infrastructure, a high voltage DC transmission, to really reduce the cost of some of the new changes that are being introduced to this grid. So this is not just the United States, as I said. This has transformed the world. And this is worldwide. It started out here, it went global. And it is called the greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century by the US National Academy of Engineering. The question is, what's going on in the 21st century? And this paradigm is being questioned for the first time in a very serious manner. So what's going on? There is a tectonic shift that is happening, and is being driven by two things. Number one is the deep decarbonization of the electricity grid, electricity system. And there are a few choices that we have. One is deep penetration of renewables, wind and solar, more than 50%. California wants to be 50% by 2030 and wants to go even further after that. Demand-side management, energy efficiency, or controlling the demand. Carbon capture and sequestration. So if you have a fossil fuel base, well, why don't we capture the carbon, put it down on the ground, and do something with it? That's another way to decarbonize. And of course, nuclear energy, and you're going to hear about that tomorrow, about what the status is of nuclear. Now, which ones should we do? Maybe a combination? Well, it really depends on economics at some point, and some policy. This is one driver. The second driver is the increasing penetration of distributed energy resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that very quickly. So what's going on? On the renewable side, and we heard a little bit earlier, this has been a dramatic change in the cost of electricity generation by wind and solar. And this is not the cost, this is the long-term contract prices. These are the publicly available contract prices that have been published in dollars per megawatt hour, and it's approaching $20 a megawatt hour. In the United States, as we heard, we have a production tax credit. This includes the subsidy. But you can see where the trends are, both solar and wind, and as a result, the capacity is exponentially increasing gigawatts. Now let me say a little bit about the unsubsidized. This is global. These are the lowest contract prices, $30 a megawatt hour for wind, and $36 a megawatt hour, and I just heard recently in the Middle East, less than $30 a megawatt hour, unsubsidized. And there's still headroom. This is going down. Going down compared to what? This is compared to US natural gas and China coal, and compared to US coal and nuclear. So you can see where the economics are going. So we are likely to see, whether it's a regulation or not, we are likely to see deeper and deeper penetration of renewables. This is the cost of electricity generation. What should not be ignored in this is that this generation is volatile. We know when the sun sets and when the sun rises. It's not there at night. So when the sun sets, something else has to ramp up a lot. The grid was never designed for it. The winds go up and down, they come in ramps. And the grid was never designed for this fluctuating generation. They were pretty stable, called baseload power. So now when the generation is more than 50% and that is fluctuating, that is volatile, you got to do something. The grid was never designed for that. That's one. The second part is on the demand side. We are seeing a dramatic reduction, just like in solar and wind electricity generation. This is the cost of storage. And that is coming down, and if it reaches the pink line, the pink band at the bottom, which is expected to happen in the next 10 years, all battery electric vehicles will be cost competitive and range competitive with gasoline-based cars. And you give it another 20, 30 years, and you'll see penetration. And this is already starting to happen. Our big loads at home, which are our air conditioning, heating, and cooling, these are being controlled by smart thermostats. The smartness is coming in. And I'll tell you what that really means. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. Let me clarify that. And then, where the retail price of electricity is very high and there's sunlight available, you're getting rooftop solar being integrated because it's cheaper. It's economics. But the funny thing about this, in this day and age, is that these are all connected to the computing infrastructure that we have created over the last 30, 35 years or so, and especially over the last 10 years. These are all connected to the cloud. What does that really mean? It means you can collect the data all the time, 24/7. You can analyze the data to look for very interesting patterns that you cannot see by hand, by eyes. These are machine-based learnings. You can do remote control. I can turn off the heating in my home from a Nest thermostat sitting out here. It'll drive my wife crazy right now, but I can do that. I can start my car somewhere else. So this is the kind of networking for remote control. But what is really interesting is the last one, the aggregation. I can aggregate the load, all the generation, over hundreds of thousands of these units, some in the cloud, and dispatch it in ways that could not be done. So now, if you look at this and revisit what's going on to the paradigm, this is how it is changing. On the left-hand side, which is the generation side, I'm injecting or planning to inject more than 50% of volatile generation. This is volatility in the grid. And as I said, the grid was never designed for this. And on the other end, you'll find volatility that is introduced by large loads that can be remote controlled, but can also be aggregated and dispatched in the wholesale market. So suddenly, the bottom line is the wiring diagram that's been around for the last 120 years is suddenly changing. This is a big shift in this whole landscape. So the question is, what do we do with this? How do we help the ecosystem really go through this transition and decarbonize and integrate all these distributed energy resources? The key enabler out here, which should not be ignored in this day and age, and Tesla and Edison never had the benefit of this, is information technology and communication technology. Let me explain this. Electronic-based power management, controlling the voltage, controlling the phase angle between the current and the voltage, communication and control. These are cheap now. Sensing, whether it's the transmission lines and the smart meters and everything in between. Cloud-based computing and distributed intelligence. My phone, I can get traffic information on my Waze or Google Maps. That's all because of distributed intelligence, and somewhere there's a cloud computer that is telling me what to do. So that is coming in. And then data science, looking at large data sets and analyzing them that you could not do before. And this is all getting cheaper and better. So how do we put all that together? And by the way, not to forget that as you do that more and more, you are getting more vulnerable to cyber threats. And this is real. This is happening all the time. We don't hear about it, thankfully. But this is being probed. We are being probed all the time. So given all this, what do we do? Well, this is not a simple problem. This is not just an engineering solution and we're done with it. We need the engineering solutions to be combined with market solutions, with business models, with regulatory framework, with policy, with finance, all put together. So you got to break down the silos. You cannot stay in a silo because that's not going to solve this fundamental shift that's going on in the electricity business. So holistic, systems-focused approach to research, education, dialogue. And to do that, at Stanford, we just launched a new initiative at Stanford, which is campus-wide, called Stanford Bits and Watts Initiative. And that brings together people from all across campus, from business school, law school, engineering school, School of Earth, Energy, Environment, to really help the industry. This is in very close collaboration with industry and global industry, and we are getting a few of them coming on board, and we're more and more, with a lot of discussions going on. What should we do in this? Well, there are three things in research. We have to look at it as a grid, the transmission distribution as one system. We cannot divide that up. Second, the interaction with the consumer, it's going to be different because the consumer will have more tools in their hands to be able to connect. So how do you span the boundaries between a consumer and the grid? And finally, this will be swathed with data, petabytes of data. How you use it to synthesize the data into information and to get automation out of this is going to be very, very key. So these are the research directives. Secondly, executive education. In this time of change, one has to break down silos. So we are listening to the industry, and they're telling us that we need the education to look ahead a little bit to see where the pitfall, where the landmines, to be able to anticipate and strategize. And finally, in these times of change, dialogue is very important, just like we were having out here. It's very important because otherwise it gets competitive. And it's very important to get win-win situation. So that's the other thing, is convening the stakeholder at Stanford as a neutral party. We don't make money out of the grid. We don't run the grid. So how we do that is something. And so we are now preparing ourselves to provide, our goal is to really offer strategic value for a secure future, for the industry, for the regulators, et cetera. So that's a little bit on bits and watts. Finally, I hope I've set up the stage to explain what's behind the wall. And there's a major transition going on behind the wall, and you'll get to hear first by those two videos by the students at Stanford, and then by a wonderful panel. Thank you very much.